Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Well, WoW is kind of slow right now, which means that WoW Twitter is once again ablaze with the latest complaints about how WoW works, which is how it goes. It's better than drama, though. And so I wanted to talk about some of the tweets that I've seen from a number of people who've actually just been discussing how gearing is in Dragonflight and some of the issues that they've had with it from a variety of perspectives. On the one hand, there's some conversation going on about like Mythic Raid loot versus M+ loot with people like Sups, talking about how frustrating it is that main Mythic Raiders are forced into doing M+. I personally kind of equated it to when Mythic Raiders had to PvP early in seasons and how it didn't really kill raiding and it was just a mild annoyance, and it just sort of just adds on to what usually happens for high-end raiders that have to be able to go through it. I remember Equinox responding to this as well, talking about how all of the best items in the game are, of course, coming from raiding more often than not, and so high-end M+ers are also in this boat where they're forced into raiding. And so, all in all, I'm not too surprised for PvE needing to do all of these things. Like back in the day, PvPers were even raiding for specialized trinkets that they'd be able to kill their opponents faster, and so not too shocked by some of these occurrences. I also wanted to highlight throughout this some of the JB and Scripe tweets talking about loot that we've been dealing with for quite a while. For one, it's been like Race to World First tuning and how it's relating to how quickly people are gearing, because the World First guilds were killing Farak at 480 and were killing Smolderon at like 473. And from 1 week to another, you were going from, 445 or something like that, near 450, leaving Aberrus, jumping up to the 470s as you're killing off mythic bosses, and then ending at 480, just a handful of eye level away from what is max gear for a lot of people, which means that Blizzard's, of course, flat nerfing a number of different bosses on their own, because the gear itself is not enough of a soft nerf to be able to make it achievable for lower ranked guilds. So I want to get all of this up together and propose a couple of solutions and some of the ideas that I also saw from Twitter to actually see what could actually come that's not going to be a pain in the ass to everybody. One of the biggest things is how quickly high-end guilds are, of course, gearing. Jumping up from 440 to 470 in a week or so, just from doing normal, heroic, multiple different levels of splits, having the benefit of group loot on hand, so you can personally funnel eye level into specific characters, trinkets into specific characters. All of that is insanely powerful, and it's always going to happen no matter what. That being said, what do you have as a solution that's not going to impact the average guild? Because if you're going to be nerfing the amount of crests that are going to be dropping, for example, then that just again affects the average guild and makes their life a little bit more irritating. One suggestion I did see in Scripe's comments was about having acquisition of crests, not the cap of crests, but the acquisition of crests increase over time. And so that way they start off very small, but for the activity that you're doing, they get higher and higher and higher over time. So you'd have to adjust the caps, of course, to be able to compensate, but it would make it significantly easier for guilds to make sure that they're clearing and not still having to grind endlessly. But more importantly, I think it'd be a good incentive for your alts if, rather than having to say, oh, well, your cap is higher, so, or there is no cap for aspect crests, so you can continuously be farming all of them, just go do that. No, I think it'd actually be quite a bit better if the amount of crests that you were receiving was also going to be higher as just in general. Another issue I've really felt with the new crest system in general, but also when I've been gearing my druid lately in our Zero to Hero series, has been the types of crests that you're trying to play around and how irritating it is getting the right crests and scaling up and scaling down or trading in certain crests for another level. I think that is insanely annoying to actually have to deal with, and I'd love it if there was some greater simplification of the upgrade tracks, or just making it a lot easier for you to use high level crests to trade down in without having to just go to a vendor every single time, but just having it as getting an aspect crest means that you can spend it on worm crests and it's automatically more valuable than worm crests and it's cheaper. So you're spending 7 aspect crests instead of 15 worm crests or something along those lines, so that I don't feel like I have to play a mini game of juggling my currencies just to be able to figure out how I want to upgrade my gear. Dragonflight also brought back group loot, which effectively is master loot, and I definitely have noticed how much more frustrating it is to be gearing, especially as a healer, in this world when you're having to deal with group loot. If my guild was actually not doing splits, if we weren't raiding, 5 days a week in the first 2 weeks of the raid, so we'd have plenty of time to do normal and heroic and then get started into mythic, it would be so much more difficult to be able to accrue gear. I think they've actually done a fantastic job with tier acquisition in this expansion, especially in a Mirdrasil, where you have an achievement, you have, like a merit bound unlock for your tier piece or one tier piece, and then everybody just gets handed one tier piece on top of that, and then the rest is kind of up to you. I'm a huge fan of that as a system. I love how that works. And then there's just sort of the extra couple eye levels or the extra couple pieces that you want to be able to rapidly acquire your tier. But of course, as a healer, it's very tough to make sure that you're getting those pieces early on. And this is something that Subs kind of dovetails into about the mandatory Mythic Plus running that raiders have to do. Whereas, yeah, you could say for M+ers that they need to do heroic. It's quite a different experience where Mythic Raiders need to be farming their 20s early on week 1 versus M+ runners who are playing the entire season. They're just going to go in 1 week and clear through heroic raid, try to get whatever item they can, and then be able to move on from there. Equinox had responded to Subs talking about how, yeah, if you wanted to get your 496 perfect BIS items, then you have to Mythic Raid or something like that to get them. But outside of like World First M+ teams, which is a tiny fraction of the community, you don't really need the highest eye level Rage Heart, the highest eye level Augury to be able to go for title M+, title level M+. So I think that's like a super, super niche problem. I think in general, Mythic Raiders have a larger onus to make sure that they're farming high level M+ early in a season for the raid progression than high level M+ers having to Mythic Raid unless they want to be on a World First M+ team. And of course, that brings us back, like I mentioned, to the group loot versus personal loot thing once again. The real big change that I noticed for like Mythic raiding teams was really like the World First race, where instead of doing splits in a normal looking raid group that has a variety of specs, splits for normal and heroic for World First teams were just all plate, all cloth, all leather, etc. I don't think we should ever really worry about what the World First teams are doing when we know they're going to be grinding as insanely freaking hard as possible to make sure that they're gearing. I do agree that having a lower eye level in general early in the season, especially as Mythic Raids are getting cleared, it's probably a pretty good thing because then it allows gear to more naturally nerf boss fights and for you to feel more powerful over time, but not if it's going to come at the expense of the average raid team. And so I like the idea that one of Scripe's responders had mentioned about a scaling crest kind of system. But I would definitely love it if there was going to be some simplicity added into the mix for that crest system. I also do think that the only solution for like healers actually getting gear once again is bringing Spirit back into the mix, like Subs had mentioned, or just going back to the days of personal loot, as JB had mentioned. Both of them kind of work. In general, I'm a huge fan of Spirit gear. I just like the idea that healers are going to be able to scale their mana regen depending on the needs of an encounter, depending on the situations that they're going to be in. In general, I wish they'd get rid of external mana resources like Symbols mana regen, Innervate, all of that stuff. I just wish that they would turn it into something else and we wouldn't have to worry about it, make Innervate a personal only cooldown, whatever, right? I don't like having those things that are scaling other players' output without any sort of additional control. I'd much rather prefer it if it was simplified into, here is spirit gear. If you want to have less spirit, take it off your gear. And if you want to have more spirit, put it on your gear. There's a price and there's decision making that you want to go into it. And that's how you're able to manage your resources as a result. I would personally love that. Personal loot would be pretty cool too. I'm not at all worried about what the World First teams are doing. If they're running all cloth runs or they're running other normal runs, they're basically going to play for 16 hours a day anyway to get themselves geared before they step into Mythic one way or another. So that doesn't really clock into me. I think the experiment of adding group loot back into the equation pretty much made it so that every Mythic raiding guild that wanted to play for ranks, which there's a lot of them, are just going to naturally use group loot as master loot and not have to worry about personal loot anymore. It's kind of cool that, yeah, there is, the control that guilds have once again. But yeah, I think for a lot of teams that are not doing splits, it's an extra level of irritation that gets added into the mix when it comes to group loot and that sort of like social dynamic kind of thing. And so I'd be fine if they kept group loot and added spirit gear. But I think in general, especially since reforging is not existing anymore, they'd probably be in a better position to just have personal loot come back. Loot, gearing, the social dynamics of raiding is a huge topic, and so I'm sure that there's things that I missed. Let me know in the comments down below. Huge thank you to our subscribers who, of course, make all of this possible, as well as our patrons, Twitch subs, and all of it. Thank you all so much. There's also been a big post by the nascent GM about how mythic raiding needs to change, so maybe we'll look at that for a future video very soon. Thanks so much for watching, guys.